Hi there. Today we're going to be talking about subject to sale contingencies, kick-out clauses, and subject to suitable housing contingencies. I can really talk about these right now because I have actually done all of these in the last week. And they all have forms with the exception of the subject to suitable housing. There is no subject to suitable housing form, but I want to go through the difference between subject to consummation, subject to sale, and subject to suitable housing, and when a kick-out clause is used. So I'm going to give you the example of a transaction Jennifer and I did years ago. And one of our agents here who cracks me up, he calls it the golden transaction. It could only get a name like that after it actually all went through. But this is how it went down. And yes, I do know there was an episode on where Barney Fife had gotten his real estate license. And I do know that episode was the foreshadowing for this transaction. However, ours ended up successful. Everybody did buy and everybody did move. So here's how it goes. I go for a listing appointment. I list property A for sale. And then while it's on the market, I get a phone call from a cold call off my yard sign who says, "We're sitting outside of this property. Can you come show it to us?" Now, I will tell you, I was at the grocery store and my son's 16th birthday party was like an hour and a half later. And I had the groceries for that party. And I was like, absolutely, I will be right there. So off I go with all my groceries and I go show this house. And these clients say, "You know what? We like it. We want to buy it. We'll be a cash buyer." And I said, "Okay, well, that's great. But I don't do dual agency." And I want to remind you how tempting it would be in that moment to do dual agency, right? I could make double commission. They're a cash contract. In hindsight, thank God I didn't do it. So I said, "You know what? Let me call one of my fellow agents. I'd love for you to look at that." This is a different market, y'all. I was like, it's always best to take a tour of the property a second time before you make an offer. Now, I know how absolutely ridiculous that sounds now. What a luxury, right? But I called Jennifer and I was like, "Jennifer, here are these people. Can you show them a house that I have listed?" But I talked to them. They have a house they have to sell first. And I have asked them if I can come in and do a listing presentation for them. So I was representing the seller on property A, but I wanted to go do a listing presentation for these buyers for their property, which we're going to call property B. So I go, and Jennifer's like, "Sure, whatever." So she goes and shows them the house again, and they decide to write an offer. Well, at the same time, I go visit them at their home, and I am going to list their house for sale. So I put their house on the market. Now, keep in mind, I'm not doing any dual agency at this point. I'm representing the seller on property A, and I'm representing the seller on property B. So I put the property on the market, and we get an offer, and that buyer has a house they have to sell. So that buyer has a buyer's agent from a different firm, and that agent is obviously going to list that house for sale. So I'm on my way to New York for 36 hours to watch my kids sing at Carnegie Hall. It is a Friday afternoon when that house is going to go on the market. My seller of the first property, of property A, doesn't know where he's going to move to yet. So I say to him, "Hey, Dave, crazy idea. The buyer of your buyer's house is getting ready to put their house on the market this evening. My dad can show it to you. Would you want to go see it?" I said, "Just call me. It's probably not going to work for you. Call me and let you know what you think." I'm in New York City on Friday night when he calls me and says, "Ashley, I think we want to buy that house." So that would make a complete circle. A's buying B, B's buying C, and C's buying A. And so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll do that while I'm here out of town. Yes, Anastasia, this truly happened. Jennifer is my proof. So then on property C, I am now the buyer's agent. So I am representing one side of all three of these transactions. And I almost lost my mind. However, we held it all together. Everybody closed successfully. I will say there was a moment at the very end when my buyer at the tail end, no tail end, in the circle, when my buyer, my original client, was purchasing that home that was listed by somebody from another firm, that seller realized she had some leverage, and she just decided a couple of days before closing, yeah, I'm just not going to do the rest of the repairs. Because she realized, well, what are we going to all do? Are we all going to disband and go look for other properties? She knew, like the house of cards we had built, a circular house of cards, it was all going to fall down if one party said, made a fuss too much. So my poor buyer had to buy the house with a bunch of repairs not completed, but he did it. And that is the story of how we had a circular transaction that actually happened and actually worked. This wasn't even in a low inventory market. Anyway, the number of people who have had to bring up the Barney Fife story to me, and I'm like, yes, but I am still in real estate. Barney Fife gave up his real estate license at the end of that episode. So during that, we had, thank you, Anastasia. During that, we had every single house was subject to the consummation of the other two houses. So we had to write in some language, and this is wacky. They all had to record within minutes of each other. And there were two different municipalities. And this is before there was online recordation. So they had runners, just like in like a Jason Bourne movie or something. Like everybody had to have a watch, and everybody was on the phone, and everybody was like, okay, I'm recording at Roanoke County right now. Okay, well, I'm recording at City of Salem right now. So they could all record at the same time. And then everybody hit the button to wire all the money at the same time. When I say, I think I drank a whole bottle of tequila when this was done, I'm probably not lying. It was a long 45 days to get this thing to close. Plus, part of our job is to keep all that stress off of our clients, so we absorb all of that stress. I did not ever want to say to any of them, this could all fall apart at any second, but it could. Jennifer and I had that conversation a lot. So that is an example of subject to consummation. So in that transaction, my primary client, my first client who had his listing, he accepted the contract from Jennifer's buyers, but he had a subject to suitable housing contingency, meaning I've got to find a house. And if I can't find a house, I don't have to sell my house. So we wrote in a subject to suitable housing contingency. I think it was for like 2 weeks. And that meant anytime during that 2-week period, if he could not find a home or secure a contract, then he was allowed to terminate the contract. So in addition to that, and Amy, I did not mean to request you to unmute yourself, sorry. So when the subject to suitable housing contingency was removed because we secured a contract, then it was replaced with a subject to consummation. So we are under contract, and all three of these were subject to the consummation of the other ones, which means the buyer and the seller do not have to close on the transaction unless and until the other home closes. So I'm going to share my screen now, and I am going to show you where you would use that. Now, subject to consummation can be found on 2 different forms, because if my client is already under contract, I made an offer last night for some clients. Their house that they're selling is already under contract. So when we submitted our offer for their future home last night, there was no reason to do a subject to suitable housing. There was no reason to do a subject to sale contingency, meaning we have a house, we've got to get it sold, because it's already sold. It's already under contract. So the only contingency I needed to place on that offer last night, because my client's house is already pending, was a subject to consummation. So when I wrote that offer last night, I used the standard clauses addendum, and I'm going to show that to you now. I used the standard clauses addendum and used section 2, clause 2 for the consummation section. And I wrote in there, this contract, the offer I was making last night, is going to be subject to the consummation, meaning the closing, the successful closing of the sale of the purchaser's property located at 56 Estate Circle, which is scheduled to close on, and I can fill that out because I have a ratified contract on their property. So I was able to say, which is scheduled to close on March 23rd. And then the consummation clause gives about a 2-week wiggle room there in case there's some financing issues, some delays, some, bank holidays, whatever may come up that might cause it to close late. They don't want that to be a do or die date. So instead, there is some wiggle room there. And that's because in the state of Virginia, our closing dates are on or about a date. This goes on to say that if the property that this contract is subject to consummation on doesn't close, then they don't have to buy this other house. And that's for a very good reason. Unless my client's existing house closes, we don't have seller proceeds to roll into the purchase of their future home. So because they have a house for sale that is already under contract, we have to make our future house contract contingent upon subject to consummation. In the example that I gave from last night, because we were already under contract, I can skip straight to the standard clauses addendum, which houses this consummation language. However, let's say my clients had not put their house on the market yet. They're saying to me, Ashley, we want to buy a house, but we don't want to put our house on the market unless and until we secure a contract on a house, a future house, because we don't want to be homeless. And I can understand that. Then I'm going to use a different form with my offer on their future purchase. I'm going to use a form called subject to sale contingency. Because not only am I asking these sellers of our future home to be patient with us because that house that we own has to close first, I'm also saying we haven't even gotten it sold yet. It's not even on the market yet. And that form, lets me get back to forms here, is called subject to sale, kick out, and consummation. This is a separate form. You're going to use this form when your client either has not put their home on the market yet, or their home is on the market, but it is still in active status and has not executed a contract yet. So this top section indicates all the parties, and then you're going to fill out the subject to sale clause. And it's going to say, and I'm the buyer's agent now, I'm going to fill out the subject to sale clause that says, this contract is subject to the purchaser having their property at 123 Sesame Street under contract of a sale. And this is important. It's in all caps. That is not subject to the sale of another property by blank date. And I'm going to explain that in a moment. It is also subject to that sale being consummated within X days of the removal of subject to sale clause. And it is agreed that they are going to have their property on the market within blank hours with Wainwright and Company Realtors. Okay. So let's break all this down. What that's saying is, okay, I'm the buyer's agent. I'm submitting an offer, but I know we have to get their house on the market to sell because we're going to need the cash from that sale to purchase this other home. They can't buy own 2 houses at the same time. So I, the buyer's agent, am going to fill out this subject to sale clause, and I'm going to say something like, this contract is subject to the purchaser having our property at 123 Sesame Street under contract. But then I'm going to tell my buyers, when we list your house, this clause says that the buyer who comes to us to purchase your home, they cannot have a house that they have to sell first. They can have a house already under contract, but they can't have not put their house on the market. You can't use 2 of these forms in any string of transactions. And I know this is pretty abstract, but what it means is the seller who's going to sell my clients their future home is saying, we're willing to let you put your house on the market, and we're willing to give you a subject to sale clause, meaning we understand you've got to get your house on the market and sell it, but do not dare take a contract on that house where those buyers still have to get their house on the market. Because the sellers of the future home have no interest in hanging around for a third party, 2 transactions behind them, to put their house on the market and sell it. Now, what they are saying here is buyer, we are going to execute this contract with you, and you may put your house on the market to sell it, and you may accept offers from folks who already have their house under contract. In other words, have a subject to consummation contingency. So what the seller of the future home may respond or counter with when they get this, because as the buyer's agent, I've said, hey, seller, we really want your house. We're going to give you top dollar. We're going to have just regular inspections, nice, clean contract. Oops, we kind of have to get our house on the market, but we promise we're going to do that within 48 hours. Don't be one of those people who puts like 178 hours. No, that says hours for a reason. Do a reasonable number of hours that you're going to have the house on the market. And you need to tell your seller, you may be painting all night long, but we have to put our house on the market in 48 hours, 72 hours max, in my opinion. Okay. Otherwise the seller's like, come back to me in 3 days. What are you doing? You know, we're not going to wait around for 178 hours for you to put your house on the market. So I'm the buyer's agent. I've said, we're going to put our house on the market in 48 hours with my firm. I'm ready. We're going to take some pictures tomorrow. We're going to have it ready to go. We're going to put it on the MLS. And the seller of the future home may say, that's cool. We're willing to give you 48 hours to put your house on the market. They may ask questions like, do you think it's ready for market? And this is why you have to disclose what house it is. That listing agent is going to go snoop around and see if they think that house is going to sell quickly. So as the buyer's agent, I'm saying, we're going to have it on the market in 48 hours. We're not going to accept contracts from people who still have a house to sell. The seller of the future home may say, that's cool. I'm going to let you do all that, but I'm going to put a kick-out clause in place. So as a buyer's agent, I am never filling out this kick-out clause section, because I hope I got an uneducated listing agent on the other side who says, cool, okay. And they just sign the papers. Because what the kick-out does is it says, okay, the house we want to buy, yes, we have a contract on it, but we can be kicked out. And let me tell you how we could be kicked out. Because I'm going to be holding my breath that whole time until we get our house under contract. When we get our house under contract, we're no longer a subject to sale contingency because we sold it. Now we're going to replace that with a subject to consummation clause, which is the very same form. The second page has the subject to consummation section. So what does the kick out mean? And under what terms can they kick us out? So the seller says, okay, Ashley, you and your buyers get the contract, but we're putting a kick out clause in. I, as a buyer's agent, do not want to see that kick out clause longer than 48 to 72 hours. Because what that looks like is minding my own business, trying to get my listing sold so that we can get rid of the subject to sale contingency and replace it with a subject to consummation contingency. And Friday night, the listing agent on our future home calls and says, Ashley, we just got another offer. It doesn't have to be better than ours. It doesn't have to be for more money than ours. The only criteria it has to meet to kick us out is that those new buyers do not have a house to sell first or have already gotten their house under contract. So then they're going to give me notice, and it should be in writing to say we are now triggering our kick-out clause period of time. As a reminder, it is a 72-hour kick-out clause. Consider this your notice. Let me know if you can get the house under contract in 72 hours. If you can, you won't be kicked out. That's when me, as the buyer's agent, I may go back to my buyers and say, okay, your house, let's do a price reduction. Let's have 2 open houses this weekend. Let's offer an agent bonus. Let's do all the things we can do to get our house under contract quickly so that we no longer get kicked out of this house that we're trying to buy. Y'all, I know this is some thick stuff. I know. I've been doing it for a long time, and still sometimes I gotta put all the parts in place in my head. I'd like to open it up to questions. Yes, you will get kicked out. I will tell you, in a different type of market, it was kind of bad karma to go kick somebody out. Now it's like kick out, kick out, kick out. I need to kick all of you out because I got to get my buyer in a house. You know, last night I made an offer on a property for some of my buyers. We just had a subject to consummation because their house is under contract to sell. They're going to be homeless by March 23rd if I can't find them a house to buy. But the house we made an offer on last night already had a contract in place, but it had a kick-out clause. 5 of us submitted offers in the last 2 days, all of us trying to kick out those people. Some bad karma waiting for me down the road. Now, ultimately, we didn't get the offer and we didn't kick them out. Somebody else kicked them out. But those poor people who've been under contract for 2 weeks, their house goes on the market March 1st and they're already kicked out. They got to go find a new house. So now I will say, last night when those sellers accepted an offer, it triggered the kick out clause. So whatever the hours are, 72 hours, 48 hours, those buyers who have the current contract, they have 72 hours now to try to get their house sold. It's not even on the market yet though. So that is going to be a tough thing to do. So they are likely going to be kicked out. Now, in the meantime, during that 72 hours, the winning bid from last night is a backup offer. It's a backup offer until the kickout clause expires. Then that buyer who won the bid last night moves into primary position. I will tell you, there is another clause. I know y'all, you think there's just never an end to our clauses we have to use. But last night, the winning bid, part of what should have been added to their contract when it was executed was on the standard clauses addendum. I will show you. On the standard clauses addendum, which is just sort of a hodgepodge collection of clauses you may need to use, there is actually a backup offer clause. So when the winning bid was notified yesterday, a standard clauses addendum should have been attached to the contract, the winning contract, and they should have used this backup contract clause to say, yes, you won the bid last night, but ultimately you're not in primary position until the kickout clause expires. So in the meantime, you are a backup offer. Please know that backup offers are always something you can do. We lost the bid last night. We could follow up and say, hey, would you execute us as a backup to the backup? Sure, we could do that. Now, my buyers don't want to because they want to pursue other properties. And they made another offer within an hour last night of losing the bid. So, wrote it up, submitted it. It's in. We're waiting to see what happens today. So they didn't want to be back up to the backup on the house they lost last night. They wanted to pursue their second choice. But they could have said, hey, can we be the backup to the backup? And then when they get kicked out and this one moves into primary position, if something goes wrong, financing, inspections, whatever, and they end up terminated, we would immediately move into first position, into primary position. I know this hardly seems like new agent training because I know you're going cross-eyed right now with this much information. That is the appropriate response. I would never want you to work a subject to suitable housing, subject to consummation, subject to sale contingency without calling me. Call me if you're writing one of those. Call me if there are more than one moving part in your transaction. If there's more than one house involved, just call me and we'll have this conversation. Or even better, if you want me to, I'll just tell you what to do. Then I'll explain why you're doing what I've instructed you to do. Because the subject to sale, subject to consummation, all of that is thick. And I'll tell you right now, y'all, I don't do everything perfectly. When I submitted that offer last night, I got so wrapped up in the subject to consummation, subject to like kick out clause, all that stuff. I completely forgot that I knew we were doing a VA loan. I put VA loan on the contract, on the offer. I forgot to check the box for the appraisal contingency that is associated with a VA loan on the standard clauses addendum. You look right up here, there is a VA clause that I need to use for when I am doing a VA loan, 1A and B, which says this is the purchase price. If it does not appraise for that purchase price, my buyer does not have to buy the home. That is a VA requirement. Completely forgot it. Now I put it in the second offer last night for a second property. Go me. I guess I'm glad I did not get that first one because I completely forgot to check that box and include that. I was too busy doing everything else, backup offer clause and all the other stuff. Plus, in this market, we are hurrying, and it is very dangerous when we're hurrying. Okay, I'm going to open it up to questions. Also, I understand if you have no questions because you need to let this percolate down. This will be on the YouTube channel. If you want to rewind, watch it again, watch it again, and just try to get your bearings on it, I think that's a good idea. I explain this stuff more often than anything else because it is pretty thick. And that's why I gave you the example of the circular transaction at the beginning of this call, because it can get real bananas real quick. Okay.
I don't have any instruction or advice or anything. I just, I have I guess, well, it's a piece of advice. Be very careful when doing those kick-out clauses and the time frames and everything, because we're getting ready to close. My sellers are getting ready to close on a house that the initial buyer's agent had the kick-out clause where they had to sell their house, and they put in a 24-hour kick-out clause, which gave them no time. And I came back and I told him, I said, well, that we're activating the 24-hour kick-out clause because someone came in and gave a better offer and, different loan status, whatever. And he's like, well, it can't be 24 hours. I never do 24 hours. And I said, I'll go back and look again. I'm almost positive it was. He said, well, that must have been done by my assistant, but it was on there, it was signed. And so it wound up being 24 hours. And that just,
so
very careful.
I'll give you a little bit of history as to why we always say 72 hours. Back in the good old days, when there were other options like bridge loans, and a bridge loan would let you say, okay, banker, my kick-out clause has been activated, and I don't want to lose this house. Can you talk to me about a bridge loan so that I can own 2 houses for 3 months? And so that's why we would do 72 hours, because you maybe weren't going to get your banker on the phone because it was always on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday, right? Because that's when people buy houses. So it was always like Saturday morning, I'd get a call that we were getting, the kick-out clause was being activated. And then my buyers are scrambling to get their lender on the phone all weekend. And then the kick-out clause has expired by the time it's Monday morning. So that's when I started saying, let's just do 72 hours so that I know I can get a banker on the phone. Now, lots of things have changed. No one's giving you bridge loan money. Nobody's going to let you own 2 houses anymore, unless you're a very exceptional borrower. And you're always going to be able to get your lender on the phone on the weekend now. Those days of like bankers being like, cool, see ya on Monday, are not anymore, So the 72 hours now is more about being able to throw an open house, being able to do a price reduction, being able to have time to call everybody who had been interested in the property and saying, can we give you a free air fryer if you come back and buy this house? What can we do to help you buy this house? So 72 hours is a good idea. But to Donna's point, when she's the listing agent, maybe they don't want 72 hours. Maybe 48 hours is ample. Maybe that buyer in backup offer position is frustrated that they got to wait 72 hours to exhale and say, okay, we get the house, So just like everything, that is a point of negotiation there as well. Great point, Donna. All right, who's got anything else? And Miki's got a question. Which area do you complete on the standard clauses addendum for any government loan appraisal, not just VA loan? So on the standard clauses addendum, section 1 is all about government-backed loans. And what that is it is appraisal language. It is saying that the buyer will not be required to purchase the home if the appraisal does not meet or exceed the final purchase price. Now, pro tip here, if you're writing an offer with a conventional loan, there is no appraisal language. And if the appraisal comes in low, you will be in breach of contract as a buyer if you do not come up with the cash to close anyway. So if you're doing a conventional loan, you're going to want to insert appraisal language into the body of your contract, into the additional financing terms. The good news is I've already written that language for you, and it is in the broker clauses. So if you go to our YouTube channel, there's a tiny little 1-minute video. Just search for broker clauses. And it's going to walk you through step by step how to access the broker clauses I've already written and preloaded into zip forms for you. So it's as simple as going to the additional financing terms section. And when you click into that field, there's going to be a little scroll of paper that hovers right there. When you click on that and then click on the quill pen, it's going to take you into broker clauses. And then you're going to switch to broker instead of global clauses, because I didn't write any of those global ones. I don't know where they came from. I don't know who wrote those. But if you click broker, you'll switch to my library of clauses. And then you can go to the ones categorized under purchase agreement. And there is appraisal, conventional loan appraisal language there. And you can just click the button and insert it directly into that additional financing terms. So if you have a buyer using a conventional loan, there is a section right below additional financing terms that talks about the buyer being responsible to bring all money required to close in cash or certified funds to the closing at settlement in order to close on the property. So unless you have written in appraisal language, and there is what we call an appraisal shortfall or an appraisal deficit, as Jennifer's pointing out, then the buyer is still responsible to show up with that cash unless you have put in an appraisal contingency. There is no appraisal contingency, and I do not believe financing would protect you, not on a conventional loan. So you have to, on a conventional loan, write that in. So you're going to want to insert that from the broker clauses section, because otherwise that clause below additional financing terms that says, buyer, you're going to show up with certified funds or cash at closing to settle on this property. If you can't, you're going to be in breach of contract. Now, are you still going to have to buy the house? Maybe not. But are you going to lose your earnest money? Maybe. And then the buyer's not going to be very pleased when they realize you did not protect them as well as you could have. So government-backed loans, FHA, VA, VHDA, USDA, they all have to have that standard clauses addendum section filled out because they have to be contingent upon an appraisal. VA, USDA, they're not going to give you more money. You know, if the appraisal value is as much money as they're possibly going to give you. So if you're not doing a government-backed loan and you're doing conventional, then you've got to have appraisal language. Now, if you're doing a cash contract, you got to decide if you're going to have an appraisal or not. Most often, I do not see appraisal language or an appraisal contingency or even an appraisal on a cash contract. Cash buyers understand they're buying at market value. They're not buying at appraised value. Sometimes cash buyers want to have an appraisal. If you're going to write in an appraisal for a cash buyer, also write in an appraisal contingency. Otherwise, what is the point? So if they're going to get an appraisal and they go, whoa, that appraisal came in way less than what I'm buying it for, unless you've written in a contingency saying that it is contingent upon the results of the appraisal, it's just for their informational purposes only.
So back to Miki's question, Ashley,
Please.
In that paragraph you're talking about for the FHA financing, which boxes are you checking? Because I think that was her question.
You know what? To be safe, I'm checking all three. I'm going to do section 1, 2, and 3, or excuse me, A, B, and C, or whatever they're numbered, 1, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to do all of them and just fill them out. It may be a little bit of overkill, but I'm just going to make sure all that language is included. Yep.
Thank you.
Have anything else about that? Y'all, kudos to y'all for showing up for this one. It is not for the faint of heart.
Hey, Ashley.
Yes, ma'am.
I did actually send one more message, and I just wanted to make sure and see if it was even okay. If it is a government loan, can you still put that language, that contingency, appraisal contingency language in additional financing terms, as well as complete the standard clauses addendum?
I would not recommend that.
Okay.
Only because you're not going to write it as well as it is already written on the standard clauses addendum.
Okay.
Then you may have conflicting language.
Okay.
And a lot of times in the state of Virginia, they will say that something written in supersedes the standard language. So I would not want my perhaps homemade language to supersede the language in the government loan section of the standard clauses addendum, which was written by the standard forms committee with the help of attorneys. So I would not recommend that. The only time I would recommend you writing in appraisal language would be for a conventional or cash contract.
Okay, and your suggestion is also always complete that standard clauses addendum. Do not write it in. Complete that no matter what for a government loan.
As long as it is a government-backed loan. As long as
right.
VA, USDA, VHDA, FHA.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then I'm going to touch back over on Jennifer's question there for a minute, because, you know, being in the office, we see all of the contracts that come through when we're processing them. And I have actually had an agent in here that said, look, I know they went over ask price. I didn't write in an appraisal contingency, but they're always going to negotiate because they can't buy their house if not. So can you just touch on that one more time?
Yes.
Because people are using that, realtors are using that as a strategy to get under contract. It's come out of their mouth when they've brought the contracts in. So they're not understanding that well.
Yes. And I'll say even brokers in town may have differing opinions. But I do think it is fairly strong language below the additional financing terms. And I'm going to show it to you real quick. Let's get over there to it. And I'm going to show you where I think the problem lies if you do not make the contract contingent upon an appraisal if you are doing a conventional loan. So if I'm not doing a conventional loan and we make an offer of $300,000, and let's say the house was listed for $300,000, we offer $300,000 and we get it. In my opinion, I should still make that contract contingent upon an appraisal if I am doing a conventional loan. Because what if the appraisal comes in at $295,000? I would argue that section 11E that says balance of the purchase price. It says to be paid by purchaser in cash, cashier's check, certified check, or wire transfer funds at settlement. I think there is a very strong case to say that we said we'd pay $300,000 for this house. That is the purchase price. And that the lender is unwilling to loan me all of the money is irrelevant, because I have agreed as a buyer that I'm going to bring the balance of the purchase price in cash, cashier's check, certified check, or wire transfer at settlement. And if I do not or cannot, then I, as a buyer, might be in breach of contract and could lose my earnest money deposit or be sued. So that is just not a risk I'm willing to take for my buyer by not including appraisal contingency language.
Okay, so I'm going to go on the flip side. We are the listing side of the transaction, and the buyer's agent has not written in an appraisal contingency on a conventional loan, and they're coming to you now saying, hey, our appraisal came in $10,000 less. Let's renegotiate.
Yep.
So how do you handle that
situation? Well, I've had to handle that with other brokers and say, you know, with all due respect, you made no mention in this contract that you weren't buying at purchase price. You made no contingency in this contract to state that you were not willing to pay the purchase price. And I feel terrible for your buyer that they are now expected to come up with the $5,000 appraisal deficit or appraisal shortfall. However, there is no contingency in here regarding a low appraisal. So we expect, just like your buyer, to come up with closing costs, whether those are more than they expected or less than they expected. We also expect for them to come up with the full purchase price.
And if they come back with a lender denial letter because they don't have funds to close, so the lender won't make the loan, then how do you handle that?
And then, unfortunately, I have to direct them to the next page of our contract that says that the purchaser will be in default if they does not have the funds to settle as provided in this contract at the time of settlement. So the buyer would be in breach of contract, and it would be my argument that the buyer has put their earnest money in jeopardy and perhaps are in breach of contract. And I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but our sellers accepted this contract because it was not contingent upon an appraisal. They said, yay, glad somebody sees the market value in our home. Market value and appraised value are two different numbers. Sometimes they're the same number. Most of the time they're different numbers. So market value is what are people willing to pay? And quite frankly, we're probably looking at a multiple offer situation here. And there were other people who were willing to pay purchase price. And we cut them out to take your offer. So, and Jennifer has heard me in here having to have this argument with brokers. It gets escalated up to the broker level because the buyer's agent did not protect the buyer enough. And that should not cost the seller $5,000. Now, I will tell you this because this is a new agent training class. FHA appraisals stay with the property. So be very careful if it's an FHA contract that is falling through. Your seller may want to go ahead and make it work because if they get another FHA buyer, that appraisal stands. That is the appraisal. So if you get a low appraisal with an FHA loan, when you put it back on the market as the listing agent, you may not want to take another FHA loan. You may want to hold out for a conventional buyer because that FHA appraisal is going to stay with the property for a certain period of time. I don't remember how long. 6 months? No. 3 months? I don't know. I'm just guessing now. Pick a month, couple of months. That appraisal is going to be the appraisal for the property for any other FHA borrowers. It goes into the, database of appraisals for FHA properties. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Those are excellent questions, Jennifer. Chris is saying, can you contest the appraisal? You can. Jennifer, thank you for the shout out. She says, actual contract training. Yes, this is all the important stuff we got to know. And I know that it is like pulling a thread. Every time you think, okay, cool, I know everything there is to know about that, I'm going to tell you 20 more things. I'm so sorry. It's just, it's why people think we make easy money. And I will die on that hill every day that we are true professionals. We are doing professional work here. The guidance we're giving our clients, there's a lot of contracts that just get by being lucky. Things don't happen. Things don't go sideways. It's when things go sideways that I really see the professionalism of contract writing shine, not accidentally leaving vulnerabilities for your buyer. Jennifer saying, I can't tell you how many, quote, contract training classes I've attended that don't actually explain the contract. Woo! Thank you, Jennifer. I'm glad you're here. And Anastasia is filling us in that FHA appraisals stay for 120 days. So
on that too.
Absolutely. That is how long it's going to last. Chris, can you contest the appraisal? Yes. Is that appraiser going to pay you any attention? Maybe not.
Not likely.
I had, I always have the crazy stories, but I sold one of my childhood best friends a house back in our neighborhood to complete the OG neighborhood. It was awesome because now we all live there. We all have bikes. We can bike around and see each other as old ladies. It's awesome. But when I sold her house, her appraisal came in low. So we did have appraisal language. She could have terminated. She didn't want to. She also didn't want to have an outlay of cash it was like $3,000 low. So I lickety split got on the MLS and I saw that there was a property across the street further down the block that was pending. So I called that agent and I was like, Judy, when is your property closing? And she's like, oh my gosh, it closes tomorrow morning. And I was like, can you please do me a solid? Would you please change it to closed on the MLS the minute you get out of settlement? I know you have 10 days to make the change to sold in MLS, but my appraisal is depending on it. Can you please mark it sold? Because she told me what it had sold for because it was closing the next morning. And I knew that comp was going to help me. It was directly across the street, down the block just a little bit. It had the same number of bedrooms and bathrooms, relatively same square footage. I could not have asked for a better comparative. And because it was a more recent sale, they had actually gotten a little more money. So that I was able to send that. I called the appraiser and I said, hey, just not micromanaging you. You want to be really nice with appraisers. But I checked with the agent on Maryland Avenue who has a house that's closing tomorrow morning. She's going to go on and mark it closed by lunchtime. Would you mind taking a peek at that later and see if that might help you adjust the appraisal to closer to our purchase price? And we got exactly what we needed at that point. And she was able to have her mortgage, not bring any extra money to closing, and close on the property. Is it likely that that will ever happen to me again? Probably not, but it saved that one. There have been others that I have pushed back and said, hey, I noticed you used a house that has a garage and ours doesn't have a garage. I noticed this, that, and the other. And they've said, no, I'm not changing it. And that's their prerogative. Another interesting thing to know is know a little bit about appraisals. They are tasked with the job of bracketing the property, is what it's called. They need to find houses that are a little bit better, a little bit worse, a little more expensive, a little less expensive. They have to bracket the subject property. That's why when you look at the appraisal, you might be saying, why in the world are they using that one? It's got more square footage. It's got less square footage. It's because they are bracketing the subject property. All right. Anastasia says, appraiser sees a copy of a contract, so he sees the value we are trying to get, but they don't want to lose their license. Absolutely. 100%.
I have to explain everything in detail, because if they raise the property price way above what their comps are, I have a friend that's an appraiser, and it's just, I do not want her job. She does not want our job. It's kind of funny. We talk about it all the time, but if you're way off, there's so much paperwork. They have to really explain themselves on why they feel your property is superior over a comp that's basically the same, but she's valued at lower or it closed lower. So it's a lot of work. I would not want her job. I tell her all the time that I wouldn't like her job.
No. And Carla says that there's a great appraisal training coming up at RVAR next month. I'll throw a notice for that up in the Facebook group. So that would be an awesome class for you to attend. And they're doing a lot of their classes hybrid. So that could potentially be a hybrid class where you could hop on Zoom, and Jennifer will be there so you can meet Jennifer. So I had one more thing I wanted to add. What was it about appraisals? Might be gone. So sorry. But that leads me directly into our Get Business Quick idea, which is attend events. Go to the appraisal training class next month. Go to it. Sit next to Jennifer. Also, friendly reminder, we are having our, hang on, let me just